I'd like to acknowledge that this episode of the Teach New South Wales podcast was recorded on the homelands of the Darug people. I'd like to pay respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. Welcome to the Teach New South Wales podcast, a podcast by teachers for teachers. Hi everybody and welcome back to another episode of the Teach New South Wales podcast. You're joined again by myself, Siobhan, and Shannon.
Hello.
Today we're very lucky to be speaking with Jade. Jade is a secondary English and history teacher and teacher librarian. Jade has an infectious passion for building a positive reading culture in schools. Currently, Jade works with the Arts Unit as the New South Wales Premier's Program Officer in Reading and Spelling. We are so looking forward to diving into her story about how she became a teacher librarian and how she's making a system-wide impact with the Premier's Reading Challenge. Welcome to the podcast, Jade.
Thank you so much for having me. We've got some icebreakers for you just to make sure you get settled and comfortable before we dive into the nitty-gritty. We thought this one would be quite fitting for you, and I'm interested to see which one you take out of it. What are you reading, watching or viewing at the moment?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask this. And
if you don't say a book, I'm going to be disappointed.
No, this is where the chaos reader in me is uncovered because I have 3 books on the fly, minimum at any one time.
Oh my gosh.
Physical book, I am reading Don't Let the Forest In by C.E. Drews, which is a YA dark academia horror story.
Okay.
And then audiobook, I am listening to the Raising Readers by Megan Daly. And my ebook that I have on the run at the moment is Amari and the Night Brothers. And the author has escaped me right now. But
That's all right, we can look it up.
Yeah, so I'm only reading 3 books at the moment.
Only?
Which is my minimum. I always have one in every format.
Wow. She's multimodal.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you sort of have a reading goal in 2024 that you've hit? How many books did you read in 2024?
My reading goal is always around about the 70 to 80 book mark.
Great.
Because obviously I read a lot.
Yeah.
I always stop logging partway through the year. So I stopped logging in September and I got up to 64 books.
Nice.
So I think I met my goal.
Yeah.
But I'm
Definitely.
not sure because I always
gosh.
forget. I use Storygraph because I am a chaos reader and I'm reading things all over the place. I'll finish a book and then forget to log it.
Well, that's so exciting. For anyone that's tuning in audio only, can I just describe Jade's outfit to you, which is this incredible dress with just a lovely collection of books on there and some very fun and fresh earrings that actually are, live. You
They
can
do
flick
open
through
up.
the pages
Yeah.
of the books.
These are my Jane Austen earrings. So they've got little quotes from Pride and Prejudice.
I love that.
And then some little illustrations as well.
Very impressive. And I'm thinking, did they 3D print those? I wonder
They're
how
handmade. I got them from
that's so special.
a folk festival. This lovely woman hand makes them. So I've got a few and they're very special to me.
Unreal. Well, you're really fitting into the archetype of a teacher librarian
Thank you.
right now.
Embodying teacher
I'm here for
librarian.
it.
Yeah,
I love it.
we're ditching the cardigans and the horn-rimmed glasses. We're embracing the book princesses.
New age.
I love it.
Our next one that we have is if you could go to dinner with any influential person, dead or alive, who would it be? And it can also be someone fictional.
Influential person, dead or alive. Oh my gosh.
It's so tough, isn't it?
It really is. Look, I'm going to go left of field here, and I'm going to go with what I was listening to on Spotify this morning as I was getting ready. And I'm going to say Chapel Roan because
nice.
just, I love a good upbeat pop song.
Yeah.
And she's just had this meteoric rise over the last 12 months.
Incredible.
I just love to get behind that real character that she puts on while she's performing.
She's the hot to go girl, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
iconic.
Yeah. So that's top of mind. I'm sure I could have, there's so many literary characters that I could.
For sure.
She's got quite a few bops. I'd
she
like
does.
to spend some time in her mind.
Yeah,
I imagine
exactly.
it'd be a fun place to bounce around in.
Yeah, for sure.
I love that. That's really cool. And our last one, what's your one tip or tool that you think every early career teacher should know about?
Ooh.
And this can either be like early career teacher in, your faculty or thinking about the teacher librarian space.
Okay, so for early career teacher. Can I do one for both?
Why not?
Yeah, okay. Early
World
career
is your
teachers.
oyster, Jade. Hit us with it.
Amazing. So for early career teachers, I would say you're going to have so many ideas and you're going to get so overwhelmed with trying to execute them all. So pick a few and do a few good things well. Don't try to do everything. Don't try to be everything. There's that temptation when you first start, because the more that you do, the more connections you form with your students, the easier it is for you to teach them because you understand them better. But you also need to find a balance there, because it's really hard to be a good teacher when you're burning yourself out. So finding that balance and taking on a few important things to you, and then, really setting that good work-life balance as in your first year. Once you've got a few years under your belt, there's the time to really start picking up more, because your teaching practice a bit better.
You've honed your craft.
Yeah, exactly. And you can balance it a bit better, but I remember how exhausting the first year of teaching was when I was trying to do everything. And I remember someone giving me very similar advice, and that made a big difference in finding my balance. And then for early career or freshly retrained teacher librarians, the thing that I would say is that as a TL, it's easy to feel very isolated because you're the only teacher librarian in the school unless you attend or unless you work at a really large school. So find your networks, look at social media, look at professional networks out there, and that is your staff room, and that is where you can really have those fantastic collegial discussions and collaborate with other people who really understand your craft. But also don't be afraid to go and, visit the other faculties and spend some time having, if you can have lunch breaks with them or even just like a coffee or a tea, because it's really easy to just stay in your space, in your little silo, and feel really isolated. But there's some beautiful connections that you can make with other teachers in your school, and like all it takes usually is reaching out, and you can find a good connection there, and then really feel like you're able to collaborate more with the teachers at your school.
Yeah. Is there a statewide staff room for teacher librarians?
There is, yes.
Fantastic.
The teacher librarian statewide staff room.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
We'll definitely put the link in our show notes so that people can access that.
For sure.
That would be really, really great for people who are thinking about or who are going through retraining at the moment. Or who are current teacher librarians.
Exactly.
Want to get in on what's happening.
Yes.
Now, can you take us back to where your spark began for teaching?
So my initial spark from teaching was almost a little bit of a roundabout way. I finished school and I knew I really liked learning and I really loved English and history, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I enrolled in a Bachelor of Arts and I double majored in English and history. And then during uni, I got a job as a swimming instructor because it was close to me. It paid really well. And I was just like, sweet, what a great job. I get paid decently. I have, relatively flexible shifts.
Yeah.
And I think it was in my second year of uni that I realised that I was really enjoying seeing students progress at swim school and just seeing that, getting students to that point where when they first started with me, if you let go of them in the water, they would go under and they would drown. And then getting them to the point where they could swim unassisted was such a beautiful moment. It was so heartwarming, and to then also make those connections with those students. But at the same time, at uni, I had a really good group of friends and we'd work together, and I was known as the editor. So I'd get a lot of, I'd help proofread
their assignments.
Assignments, because I was, my big strength was editing and, making things nice and clear in essay format.
Eye for detail.
Yeah. So I'd help edit a lot of my friends' work, and I really enjoyed that too. So I had that epiphany at the end of my second year of my arts degree to go, well, why don't I put these two things together? Why don't I teach English and history, the two subjects I really love, because I really enjoy that teaching side of things, but I'd really like to not be in chlorine all of the time. So
Bad for the curls.
it is terrible for the curls.
Yeah.
I had a
And
bleach,
the nail polish.
Yes, I had a bleach balayage from the
The
from the
chlorine.
water before it was fashionable, but my hair was not healthy.
My career in swim school teaching was also short-lived.
yeah.
Chlorine got to me too.
It's pretty rough, eh?
yeah.
So you became an English and history teacher?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And then you retrained and became a teacher librarian.
Yes.
Would love to dive into sort of going through what that retraining process was like for you.
Yeah. Well, do you want to know why I retrained or what
Tell
it was
us.
like? Okay.
Tell us.
Give us both.
I was at my second school working as a history teacher at the time, and I got this text message at 3 a.m. in the morning, and I swear it was a dream. And it was this message saying, don't come to work tomorrow, the library's burnt down. And I remember waking up, seeing that, and then going back to sleep and waking up thinking, wow, I had a weird dream last night that the school library burnt down. And then I checked the news and the library had burnt down.
Wow.
And that wasn't the moment, but it was about 12 months after that where, as a teacher, I was seeing my students' research ability and their critical thinking skills decline. I noticed that students were reading less in their own leisure time, and I also noticed that there was that space that students previously had to go to during recess and lunchtime that was no longer there, and there was this need for that, and there was these students who kind of really felt lost on the playground because the library was their space. And so I was seeing this change, and at that same time the previous teacher librarian, whose heart was broken at the loss of everything she'd done for the last I don't even know how long, she transferred schools because it was too heartbreaking to consider rebuilding, which I totally understand. And then a colleague tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, why don't you retrain to be a teacher librarian? And I kind of thought to myself, I'm like, I don't know if I would. Like, I don't know if that's me. And she's like, no, seriously, have a look at it. I would do it if I wasn't about to retire, but it sounds like so much fun and it sounds right up your alley. So I did look into it, and I had a look at the role description of what a teacher librarian does, and the course, which is the Master of Teacher Librarianship with CSU.
Yeah.
And the more I thought about it, the more it just seemed to fit. I'm a huge bookworm. I love reading. I'm always encouraging students to read, even as an English teacher, to help their reading and writing skills. And then, obviously the research side of things marries up really nicely with the skills of a history teacher. So yeah, I decided to retrain and went and spoke to my principal and said, hey, I've enrolled in this course. And she looked at me and she's like, you're kidding me. And I'm like, oh no, is that a bad thing? And she said, no, I'd spoken to your head teacher because I thought you'd be a really good teacher librarian. But she turned around and said, oh no, I don't think Jade would be interested in that. So I'm so happy that you are. And it just worked out so nicely. So I had this really unique opportunity to learn my craft while the library was this tiny little demountable at the back of the school with, a couple of 100 books on the shelves, and really have the chance to be part of that rebuilding process. So yeah, it took a library burning down, and I wouldn't recommend that for most people, but that was the spark that got me to retrain.
Yeah, definitely. So you kind of saw the library in its smallest capacity. It's sort of easily transportable across the school.
Yeah.
What did that eventually turn into once you stepped into the teacher librarian role?
So the biggest part of that job was the rebuild, and obviously rebuilding the actual physical building took a lot of time, but also rebuilding the collection and then rebuilding in students' minds and in teachers' minds what the library was going to be. So I was very mindful of, while that library was still being designed, getting the collection up and established so that when we moved in, there weren't these empty, bare shelves. So there was a lot of purchasing of books, a lot of student recommendations and what we call patron-driven acquisition. And then I turned also to the Premier's Reading Challenge book lists to really develop a collection that had a lot of good choices for reading for fiction and for leisure, and then a very targeted non-fiction collection that looked at supporting all of the, especially the senior subjects, but just any subject that we offered, and a lot of high interest non-fiction as well. And then really looking at what the space could be. And I really had this vision in my mind that I wanted the library to be a space that students saw as their own, that they saw as something that they had a say in and that were heavily involved in. So that led me to create a student librarian team. And that started as this tiny little, I had 2 students who would come down when we were in the demountable, and they would help me shelve at lunchtime. And that's where it started. And we got to a point where I'd have 40 students apply, and we'd have 4 separate teams in the student librarian team. It was recognised as a leadership team, and the library became this thriving place where obviously reading for leisure was a huge part of that. But also we had things like maker spaces and board games clubs and, knitting clubs and just anything and everything that you can think of that would happen in the library. At one point we had an Alice in the Wonderland themed croquet game in the library, just really making sure that students felt that when they walked into the library, they knew they were going to see something new, but they also knew that they were going to see something that was there for them, and that would support them either in reading for leisure or their research or just pursuing whatever interests that they had.
Yeah, wow. That's really wonderful, because similar to what you mentioned, the library can be such a safe haven for some students, but then other students, they might not sort of see the merit or understand the investment that they can have in the library as an environment. So I like how you've sort of portrayed they can have the different activities happen. Yeah. Similar at my school, our teacher librarian, activities would happen during lunchtime in the library, and it was so much more than just the books that are on the shelves. Yeah. I'm wondering, advice for people who are new in a teacher librarian role. Mm-hmm. How do you sort of embed yourself within your other faculties and sort of have that buy-in with co-creating what happens in the library, or ensuring that teachers understand what goes on in the library to sort of facilitate that flow-on effect in their classroom? Yeah, sure. The first place I would start is staff meetings. So if you can get a spot in at a staff development day, or even, an afternoon staff meeting where you can talk to staff, introduce yourself and say, here are all the things that I can offer for you. Yeah. Your easiest connections are always going to be English and history. And if you can start there, that's a really good place to establish yourself as someone who works closely with teachers. So for English staff, if you can look at working together on creating a wide reading program, which is what I have done at both schools and makes such a difference to students and to how English works and students' enthusiasm towards reading, that's a really good first start. And with history, obviously you have a lot of research projects, particularly with your stage 6 students. If you can offer little seminars that teach students how to use things like the State Library website, how to use Google Scholar, how to do Boolean search, use Boolean search terms to really make your research much more focused, because, obviously the internet is a fantastic resource, but information can be so overwhelming. Yes. And I always really like to use the adage that we're adrift in a sea of information, and we need to teach students how to be able to navigate that. Absolutely. It's not that the information isn't out there, it's just how do you find the stuff that's right and that's reliable and useful to what you want without spending hours and hours diving through useless articles that aren't going to help you. Yeah, it's that critical analysis. Yeah, so really starting out with those 2 faculties, but then if you can look outside the box a little bit and have, one of the most fun activities I did was with maths and with science, where I had Sphero robots. And so, I got them out and
spoke to one of the science teachers and I'm just like, how could we use this? Like, I feel like we could, do something around like area or physics or like friction or something like that. Like, I'm not a maths or sciencey person. Yeah. Maths was my worst subject.
But indulge me here, please.
Tell me, I know I can.
I've got some passion. Here. We can do it together.
here's a cool, fun thing. Yeah. Like, what could you do for that? And it. I got these robots out, and with one of the maths and science teachers, we sat down and we had a bit of a play around with them. And from there, these ideas started coming up of like, oh, we could do this, oh, we could do that. And so it then became this lovely little collaboration. So they were using them in their physics classes. And then, around Easter time, we had a little challenge where just in the library at lunchtime for our makerspace, they were trying to map out an Easter egg, but it had to be a particular distance. So just introducing maths in really simple ways. So you can be really bad at maths like I am and still forge those connections with other faculties. But as soon as you start connecting with one teacher, that teacher will go back and talk to their colleagues, and then next time they have a research task or something similar, they'll be like, oh, go talk to the teacher librarian because they did this with me and I reckon they could do something with you, and your word of mouth gets around the school. So definitely talk at staff meetings, try and forge connections, probably starting with English or history, and rely on that word of mouth, and just be really open and enthusiastic, and make sure the library is a really welcoming space where teachers want to take their classes.
Yeah, absolutely. You remind me of like when I was in my first few years teaching, I was always at the library.
Yes.
Because my teacher librarian, she was so helpful for me in my early years. Like I would be like, knock, knock. I'm looking for this book I saw online.
Yeah.
I heard it's a good resource. And she's like, is that you, Shannon? I'm like, yeah, back again. Want me to look it up in the system?
Amazing.
And like I would go to her like for history. I'd be like, I want to do a new book with my unit of work. Like, what do you think will go nicely alongside it? I'm looking for a picture book. Like, I would just go there and just talk to her about my ideas, and then she'd be like, here, and here. Here's what you need.
And that is the bread and butter of teacher librarianship. Hearing something and going, oh, I can find a resource that matches up with that. That's what teacher librarians do. They're really good.
And if she didn't have it,
she'd order it in, right?
3 days later, she'd come back to me and be like, oh, I've thought of this as well, or it'd be in my pigeonhole. Like, I just really, it was a sort of element of support that it's not like a direct mentorship or something like that, but it was, I knew that I could go to her for support. And same thing, if I was like, I really think we need to get these, like my students will love it, XYZ reason. Yeah. She'd be like, okay, let's look at it in the next lot of ordering. Yeah. And she'd always push out to our different stages, like, hey, we're going to be doing an update and order, like send through if there's anything you're thinking of or something you'd like to study with your students, or a resource, for example. And it was always so beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for any like first year teachers, that also suggest going back to that, advice to give them. Go talk to your teacher librarian.
Absolutely.
Well, I think at this point of the podcast, people might be thinking one of three things. A, I need to go and thank my teacher librarian. B, I need to go and connect with my teacher librarian because I'm realising that potentially I'm undervaluing them as a resource. Or C, I want to be like Jade and be a teacher librarian. I just wanted to flag to our listeners, those who are leaning towards option C, just know that the department does have the Teach and Learn Scholarship for specialist teaching areas. Teacher librarianship does fall under one of those specialist teaching areas, and you can be financially supported to complete your Masters of Teacher Librarianship.
Yeah, definitely worth looking into.
Yeah, head to our website for more information. I believe it's under Enhance Your Career.
Amazing.
Beautiful. So we talked about getting staff buy-in to the library as this, safe, supportive environment where everybody can collaborate. What about the buy-in for students? Because we know a lot of students can be hesitant to enter the library, don't know what's in the library. It's an unknown or unfamiliar space. So how are you going about getting that buy-in from students and sort of bringing them into the library to show them that, this is a really great place to be?
Yeah. I think the first step is talk about your library, especially if your library is physically located in a space that isn't the centre of the school. If your library is in the centre of the school, your life's going to be so much easier. But definitely speak at assemblies, put notices in your student notice board. So I was always posting on Central. If your school has social media, use that. Post what is new in the library, like what books you've gotten in, but also host a lot of activities that students can come in like they might feel like, oh, the library is a silent space and I can only come in if I'm doing homework or working on an assignment or reading a book.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 reasons I can come in and no other reason. And obviously a library supports those 3 uses, but there's also so much more. So having activities that students can come into, having little competitions that draws them in, and then the more they come into the library, the more they are actually going to use it and actually take the time to maybe pick up that book on that really cool display that you've put together. So that's definitely the first step. And just little things like, I've had scavenger hunts in the library where they had to use riddles to find slips inside of books that made them think critically. So they were like learning, and they were also having to use the library management system. So they were
fun.
learning that as well.
Yeah.
You're crazy. I want to come to this library. I'm being tricked into all this learning.
Yes, the amount of time to trick students into learning was a lot. But even just having, like little connections between, at one point I did a fairy tale display, and we did, put out all my twisted fairy tales. And so part of that was we had like a gingerbread decorating competition, just on the outside of the library. And, then I encouraged them, like there were prizes, and actually the best draw card I can say was what I used to call Throw a Rug Thursday, but it could be on any day, and it's essentially a reading picnic. So
did you call it Throw
a
Rug
Thursday? Because we do it on a Thursday, obviously, and I love a good bit of alliteration. But it was essentially a portable library. So you take the library to students. At one school, we had like a garden right outside the library. So we just opened up the doors and they came in, they borrowed a book, or they could bring their own book. They got a free hot chocolate. Everyone who came got a ticket. If they bought their own keep cup, they got 2 tickets. Cute. And then they spent recess or lunchtime reading on some throw rugs that all the staff brought in. It was just super lovely.
Beautiful.
And then at the end of recess or lunch, we did a little draw and I gave out more books for prizes.
Yeah.
And the amount of kids who were just so happy to sit on throw rugs and read and drink free hot chocolate.
Yeah.
And even if they weren't reading the whole time, like they're having a bit of a chat with their friends and eating
They
their
might be
lunch.
meeting new students that they haven't really interacted with before.
And then like pop-up libraries as well, which is pretty much the same concept where I'd put the like some really fun, interesting books out on my shelving trolleys, and I'd take them out to the playground and like kind of cordon off an area. So like if you're not going to come to me, I'm going to come to you. You can't escape the library. We're everywhere.
I love it.
But yeah, like very much reaching out to your students and making them aware that you exist is definitely the first step. And then the second step is something I was touching on earlier, is getting student voice involved in your library, establishing like, library monitors or student librarians or library leaders, whatever you want to call them, having that student voice in your school, because the amount of times I would sit down with my student librarian team and say, okay, this is what the plan is. We're going to go with this theme. Or actually, by the end of it, we had 4 teams, and we had like the physical displays team, we had the promotions team, the makerspace team, and the digital library team. So all of them had their own little areas, but they had to collaborate. And so the physical displays team would be like, okay, we're going to do a display around, like the book week theme, and it's going to be this. And then they'd talk to the promotions team, and the promotions team, they'd have to come up with like an activity or a game or a competition to get students into the library. And then the digital library team would like go through and have a look at what was in our digital collection and kind of link that through and make some posters and things like that. And then our makerspace team, they always had a hard time trying to link that in. But even if they couldn't link it in, they'd do some sort of makerspace activity, and they would help me set up and pack down and all that kind of stuff. So
the autonomy and the leadership skills that you're developing within those students as well is something that, you don't always, it's not always in the syllabus, for example.
Exactly.
So giving them that sort of outside of their normal classroom space, being able to tap into those skills and capabilities is such a wonderful opportunity for them.
I love how you've broken it up. It almost mimics like societies at university.
Yeah.
When you join a society, you can apply, put your hand up to be the marketing coordinator or the partnerships manager or the the, the finance person. So it kind of mimics that.
Yeah, and we had like director and sub-director
Love
within each of the
it.
teams
Yeah.
because we needed some leadership. Otherwise, I had 32 students who were all like, I want to do this. Like, I can't talk to 32 people at once.
Yeah.
You all have amazing ideas, but let's get some leadership going in here. And then the directors and sub-directors would have to bring me their ideas.
Yeah.
But the other advantage of having that is that when you've got students who are part of the student librarian team and they have their library shifts, who do they bring with them? Their friends. So you'd have someone show up for their library shift and they'd bring 3 friends with them. And then they'd walk them around and be like, oh, I saw this come in the other day. I think you should read it.
Because they're proud as well.
Exactly. Or I did this display or I chose this book and Miss bought it for me.
Flow-on effect.
Yeah.
It's infectious, one would say.
It is. And you get to the point where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't get out of my office because there's so many students there. What a lovely problem to have. But
exactly.
Yeah, it does take time to get there,
Sure.
but you will get there before you know it, and it will feel like a month has passed and all of a sudden you've got students in your library all the time to the point where you almost don't know what to do with all of them.
Yeah. Well, you're building a culture, aren't you?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's wonderful.
That's really important. It goes to show that the library's more than just books. It's the people that are in it. It's
Absolutely.
playing around with new and emerging technologies
Yeah.
to keep it relevant. I think that's so important. And
100%.
To me, you've shown me what the library can be. I worked with a really great teacher librarian
Amazing.
at my first school. It was kind of around the time when the Queen's Gambit series had just
Yes.
released, and she created her own competition, like the Quidsy's Gambit.
Yeah.
And so all these kids flocked and they had, knockout chess competitions
Oh my
and round
gosh.
robins, and then there was a
love
grand
that.
final, and it was promoted on the school's Facebook page. And
That's so cool.
just the hype that you can build
Yes.
around the library is that shared space is so
Yeah.
important, I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned Book Week before.
Mm.
Now, as a primary school teacher, Book Week
Yes.
is, one of my favourite days of the year, I
Yes.
have to say.
I love to hear it.
And I would like to know, because for me, I've never known anything different than us all dressing up. We do a book parade.
Yes.
It's very much like the hype building. We talk about what characters we're going to be.
Yes.
The guessing on the day of who you are.
Yeah.
I'll forever remember I went as Pippi Longstockings one year, and I had year 1 at the time, and they had absolutely no idea who Pippi Longstockings was.
I remember dressing up as Pippi Longstockings in year 2 for Book Week. So that breaks my heart, but also I understand.
I know. I was like, okay, it's a cultural indifference right now. We're in a different generation.
Sit
but that's
down,
okay.
kids, and let me tell
I was
you
like,
about the
we're
Lord
gonna
Pippi
learn
Longstockings.
today. So do you know how long these plats took me to do?
Right.
But anyway. But I want to know, because what does that look like in a secondary school? Like, is that the norm? Are we still dressing up? Like, what's Book Week like in a secondary context?
I think when I became a teacher librarian, I was determined to have Book Week in a secondary setting. It's definitely not as common. I think it is becoming more common now, but you really have to balance that stage that teenagers are going through as they're coming into their own. They're also kind of battling with trying to fit in, but also trying to figure out who they are and trying to avoid being cringe and trying too hard. So there's no parades in my school whenever I've run it, because marching everyone around in a circle as a high schooler, it's not how it works.
Don't worry, we're even pushing it with stage 3. But.
Yeah, but definitely still dressing up. And, I'd have, like most libraries, I'd have a whole week of activities that would kind of build that excitement. Obviously, always a lot of alliteration. So that would build the hype in the lead up to it. So things like Murder Mystery Monday, which was like, I have this teacher librarian colleague called Elizabeth, who came up with this idea of doing a giant Cluedo activity around the school. So she was very kind enough to share that with me. So these students would like go on a scavenger hunt across the school to try and solve murder mystery, like essentially a giant game of Cluedo, but all the characters were book characters and book locations and book weapons. So the Elder Wand and the Snitch and all that kind of stuff. So you build buy-in that way, and you give them lots of other activities to do that aren't dressing up, but then also definitely still use dressing up as an option. And definitely getting the teachers in is really important there.
First thing I'm thinking of is faculty door design competition.
Yes. And even if you don't have the buy-in for them to do, a door decoration or something like that, even getting the faculty to dress up and like having a teacher dress up category and getting the students to vote on that gets them in.
Yeah.
We used to do stage dressing up as well.
That's such a good idea.
It's also really helpful if you can't think of anything to
Yes.
Like we did a Wizard of Oz one time. We did like the 7 Dwarfs. That was a nice and easy one.
Yeah, exactly.
The Little Miss and Mr. Men series.
Yes,
that's
a really good one.
Yeah.
We had an English faculty one year do Handmaid's Tale, which was like, I was like, oh my God.
We used to teach that, and I came in one day like donned in a red sort of blanket from home and, said under his eye to my students.
Yes.
They walked into the classroom, had ominous music in the background, and they all thought it was like the best thing ever.
And it was such a good connection, right?
Yeah, you have to be willing to embarrass yourself sometimes as a teacher.
100%.
Like, oh, miss, well, that's so cringe.
Yeah.
And later at the end they go, that was actually really fun, thanks.
Yeah. And I think like embracing that and, I always like to think the thing that I try and do the most with students is show them my passion because I want students to know that it's okay to be really excited and really passionate about things. It's not cringy. People might think, oh, like Miss is a bit over the top. She's a bit crazy. She's dressing up in a different outfit every single day. But deep down, they actually kind of see that.
Yeah.
I lean into it. I'm like, yep, I'm a bit wacky. That's okay.
Well, it's role modeling, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's
and
okay to be a bit different.
Exactly.
Let's
and they really
celebrate it.
see that it's okay to do something that you're passionate about, and you might get a little bit of a pushback from it. But if you embrace it, it doesn't really matter. So definitely role modeling, dressing up yourself. And then when it comes to organising a dress up for high schoolers, giving them a lot of casual options, like what I would do in the lead up to book week is I'd put up a lot of examples of easy costumes. Like, here's some sports characters. Like, here's Tiny Timmy, or like, this soccer book or this football book. Do you play soccer or football?
Yeah.
Cool. Wear your footy gear.
Plenty of autobiographies out there.
So many autobiographies. The amount of kids that would come and be like, I'm a muggle from Harry Potter. And I'm like, look, okay.
Creative.
Like, you're starting, like, as long as they had something to connect it to, that was okay. And then, like, we definitely still award prizes, but it was an opt-in, do you want to be part of it? So at lunchtime, we'd have it either in the library or on the steps outside the library, depending on what school I was at and how much space we had. And it would be a case of like, if you want to be part of being judged, for year 7 you get up, year 8 you get up, and it would be like a cheer vote versus, teacher input, and we'd kind of come to an agreement on that. So it very much allowed those students who wanted to dress up but they didn't want to be like publicly judged and displayed, they could opt out. But the kids who were very comfortable doing that, they would come forward. And over the years, you get more and more students. Like the day after, you'd always have kids saying like, oh, I wish I had it dressed up. I'm going to do it next year. Because all their friends do. And that culture builds where it's okay to actually try something else. And
because the year 7s are more than likely coming in and having done it the year before.
Yes.
So it's almost like keeping the wheels.
And then the year 12s, it's their last chance to do it. So they really embrace that. I remember seeing some insane costumes from my year 12 students because when are they going to have the chance to do that again?
Go all out.
Yeah.
I love it. Something that also might be less buy-in in the secondary context potentially is the Premier's Reading Challenge.
Yes.
And let's talk about it because that is your primary role at the moment. So let's start from, for those who might not know, what is the Premier's Reading Challenge?
Yeah, so it is a reading challenge, and the purpose of it is to get students reading more than they would without the challenge, and to read more widely. And it's a challenge, it's not a competition, and it's open to all students in New South Wales from kindergarten to year 10. And the aim is to read, if you're in Cater 2, read or experience 30 books, 20 of which need to be from the PRC book lists, 10 of which can be choice books. And then from years 3 to year 10, it's 10 PRC books and 10 choice books. And then there's I want to say 12,000 books on the book list for them to choose from, and there's a book list for each challenge level, so K to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 9, and 9 plus. And all of those books are reviewed by our review panel, so you can pretty much guarantee that if a book's on a book list, someone has read that and gone, I can see that there is a student who will really enjoy that. Obviously, it doesn't mean that everyone is going to like it. But yeah, it's something to give some students something to aim towards, because we live in such a busy world, especially now we've got social media and devices, and, you know, students, especially as they move into high school, have so much homework and, you know, extracurricular activities and sports. Having something that reminds you to stop and read every now and then is really, really important. But also, reading can be so enjoyable if you can find the right book. So it's about encouraging students to take the time to find the book that they'll enjoy.
And you mentioned reading or experiencing a book.
Yes.
What does experiencing a book look like?
Yeah, so for K to 2 students, it can be, you know, your teacher reading to you. It can be your parents reading to you. It could be peer reading. So you're not necessarily reading independently at that stage, because not all students at that age can read independently. But then once they hit year 3, we really want them to be reading independently. That's not to say that, you know, that's when you should stop peer reading or having your parents read to you or reading to your parents. But I think one of the things that I love the most is when our students get older and then they start reading to their younger siblings, and being that role model there.
That was always something we incorporated in like our peer tutoring, or like when what's it called? I've forgotten the leadership, like when the year 6s go down.
Like peer support.
Peer support.
The buddy system.
Buddies.
Yes.
Buddies was the word I was looking for. You know, a couple of the weeks we'd always ensure that our, you know, year 6s were reading with our new kindies.
Oh,
so
I love that so much.
it's a nice way to sort of give them the confidence in their capabilities, the year 6s, and build on that leadership. But also the kindergarten students just absolutely idolized them and the time that they would spend with them.
Absolutely.
And then you look and you see them in the playground following along behind the year 6 student because
There's my
they're
reading
saying,
buddy.
cute. So that's really nice.
Yeah. So I would hazard a guess that, you know, the PRC shouldn't just land on the teacher librarian. I'm really interested to know how you get other teachers to embed the Premier's Reading Challenge into their sort of like everyday classroom routines.
Yeah. I think the most important part of that is giving your students time to read. Because as I said before, students are so busy and there's so many things competing for their attention. So if you're a classroom teacher in a primary school setting, obviously having time where you are reading in class. If you're a high school teacher, then potentially either having some sort of drop everything and read time.
Yeah,
or
I was
having,
going to say, give us the acronyms.
yes, or SRP, sustained reading periods.
Oh,
yeah.
And yeah, just giving them time to read and role modeling yourself as a reader. You know, talking to students about what it is that you're reading. I love the teachers who would send me what they're reading, and we'd have displays of like which teacher is reading what.
Reading this.
Exactly. Or even displaying that in their classrooms and showing to students that you're a reader as well.
Yeah.
And that's something that people do for leisure, and they spend their time, as much as we talk about like what TV shows or what music we're listening to or what movies we've watched, talk about the books that you read to your students.
Yeah.
And then if you have the opportunity to, you know, when you're choosing your texts to study in class, you know, maybe choosing something from the PRC book lists, or even if you don't choose something from the PRC book lists, make sure that when you get to the end of that book, okay, everyone, let's open up the PRC website. Let's log that one as a choice book.
Nice.
And just, you know, reminding students about it, giving them time and space to read, talking to them about reading.
Yeah, it's a good point that you mentioned about modelling that behaviour, because I used to do DEAR, drop everything and read, straight after lunch. We used to have lunch at 11.
Yeah.
And particularly in the summertime, I found that it was a great way to just have 15 minutes of settling time.
Yes.
So they'd have their books out before they went out to the playground, and then they'd come back in, and it was like they just knew the routine. You know, it took time to build up to this, but they'd come in quietly. They'd find a place that they felt comfortable. So it wasn't an expectation that they needed to sit at their desk. They could go sit in the corner, get a cushion. They could go, you know, they could lie down and read
on the ground. Yeah.
It didn't matter. And we'd been doing it for maybe a term, and then one of the little boys in my class, he said to me, he's like, Miss, how come you don't bring your book and read when we're reading? And I was like, oh my gosh, called out number one.
Yeah.
And you're so trying to answer her emails, but okay, you're so right.
Yeah.
So I did. I started bringing in my book and reading my book alongside them. And they're so good in that way that they will make you sort of realize, I guess, that's right, it's dear time.
Yeah.
We should all be reading.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, let me get my book.
Yeah.
And while we're at it, I will lie on the floor as well.
Exactly. And like whenever I had sustained reading classes in the library, I would do that. And it was, it doubles as, obviously you're modeling that reading, but also you'd go and sit near the students who maybe they were a little unsettled. Every now and then I'd offer to read to them if they really wanted. And the amount of times where high school students would be like, yeah, right, read it to me.
Yeah.
And you'd spend the rest of the lesson just quietly reading to a couple of students.
It's like almost incidental relationship building, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Comes in many forms, building those relationships. Now, I feel like your infectious passion for being a teacher librarian.
I'm ready to start my Master's of Teacher
Amazing.
Librarian
Sign us
today.
CSU, we're coming.
Yes.
But what would you, sort of on a final note, what advice would you give to someone considering becoming a teacher librarian?
I think if, I would say do it. Absolutely. But it is the role that I have really found myself in, and I think a lot of teachers find themselves in. And there is so much more to that role than you realise on the outside. As an outsider, it might look like you're someone who does a lot of competitions, talks about books,
creating fancy displays, and
creates cool displays, and hosts guest seminars with
different authors.
With different authors or, with different classes and things like that. But there's so much more to it. There's a lot of library science that you can dive into that's incredibly interesting. But also libraries are, in my opinion, they are the heart of the school, and a school with a functional library with a qualified teacher librarian is going to find itself in so much better stead. Students are going to be more academically supported, they're going to read more, and they're going to be more socially supported as well. The amount of impact that you can have on students outside of a traditional classroom setting is phenomenal. And I think probably the thing that I'd like to leave your viewers with is recently I was going through all of unpacking some stuff after I moved recently, and I came across all the letters that I got when I left my school before my previous school. And one of these was this really long and heartfelt letter from a parent. It was about her young daughter who was starting in year 7, and when she started, she was having a lot of problems fitting in. All of her friends went to a different school, so she'd spend her lunchtimes and recesses in the library. And I noticed that, and I'd give out her, I had these little slips of, you've been caught reading, so she'd get those slips all the time, and every now and then she'd win the prize associated with that. And then over time, as more and more students in her grade would come in, she ended up finding those connections and ended up becoming a student librarian and came out of her shell. And the letter that I got from this mother was it made me cry. It was about how they were really struggling. They were thinking about changing schools because she was having such a hard time. And then she came home one day and said, Mum, the teacher librarian, she saw me and she gave me this, and she gave me a book recommendation. And then a few weeks later, she'd made friends, and now she has just the difference that she saw at home. And it's those little moments like that where you don't realize it at the time, but you take a step back, all the students reach out to you afterwards, and you've made such a difference in their life. Obviously, teaching subjects that you're passionate about is something that I've loved as well, but being able to support students on their journey, not just through learning, but becoming an adult where they can, face the world and know who they are and form connections with other students is one of the most rewarding things I have ever done. So if you want to make really strong connections with students and really make a difference in their lives, and you also happen to like books and research and libraries, then definitely give it a shot.
Well, thank you so much, Jade, for joining us on the couch today. It has been a fantastic episode.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely.
Wonderful. I've learnt a lot.
Yeah.
And I definitely have a newfound, eye-opening into the library, I suppose, as a space and how I can best utilise my teacher librarian at my school.
Amazing. We love to hear it.
So thank you so much for joining us, tuning in, listening, viewing, whatever your preferred method is. We will see you back on the couch again very soon. If you really enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with someone who you feel would benefit from it or also enjoy it as well. And until next time, we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Teach New South Wales podcast, where we explore the dynamic world of education. Don't forget to follow, like and subscribe to be notified when new episodes become available. You can find us on social media via our handle @TeachNewSouthWales. Until next time, keep learning, keep teaching and keep making a difference. This podcast is produced by the Teach New South Wales team from the New South Wales Department of Education.